Со времени его создания человечество искало самые лучшие вещи в мире, самые лучшие вещи построить и самые лучшие вещи уничтожить. В 1947 году один человек приблизился к совершенству. Его имя — Калашников. Его творение распространяется на весь мир, и оно тоже будет изменено много раз, даже спустя почти 80 лет. Его творение станет легендой. Легендой в кино, легендой в видеоиграх и легенда знатно смертью. Распространено, идеализированное, изменено и воспроизведено. Так оно должно быть, и так оно всегда будет.
This is my review of the LCT AK12.
Ever since its adoption in the 1940s, the AK-47 has been always changing and evolving throughout its extensive use in warfare across the globe. Around 2010, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced its intent to bring a new breed of AK into military service, one that would help the AK better fit in for the demands of the 21st century. Military trials began in 2012 for what we know now as the AK-12, although this prototype looked a lot different than the AK-12 we have today. There's a pretty limited available knowledge about the specifics of why this version of the AK-12 was never adopted, but in 2013 they decided to kill the project. Fast forward to 2014, the Russian military announced that a new breed of AK-12 had passed state trials, and in 2016 the final production model of the AK-12 was announced. This new AK-12 featured many added features to the traditional AK-74, including a railed top cover, front sight gas block combo, enhanced selector, and modernized ergonomics. Best of all, it did this while remaining, in its core, an AK.
This review begins where we all expect it to, with the cardboard box this LCT ships with. The box itself is covered in graphics and LCT logos with a sticker checkmarked for the model of rifle inside. A QR code can also be scanned to take you straight to the LCT website if you so choose to use it. Opening up the lid, you'll be immediately greeted with some paperwork in a plastic bag. This consists of a simple manual glossed with the colors of the Russian flag that covers the breakdown of the LCK-12 and 15 that are ultimately the same exact rifle. LCT most likely figured that no one would confuse the controls of an AK-style rifle, so besides breakdowns of the non-blowback and electronic blowback variants, some common rules to follow, and an exploded view all in English and in Chinese, this manual is pretty straightforward. The catalog, on the other hand, is a fun read with high-resolution photos of every single thing LCT produces. AKs, M4s, the RPD, M60, and so on. This is something I'd like to see more companies include in their boxes. Putting this paperwork to the side and swiping away this half-inch thick styrofoam sheet, you can see the rifle, its 545 by 39mm replica magazine, and a metal dog tag taped to a plastic molded tray. It's a simple addition, but a nice touch regardless. After you take out and appreciate all these goodies, you can then enjoy the first moments of the AK-12 in your hands. Immediately, the weight and the dense feeling of this rifle hits you. Not many companies can pull this off so well, but at this point, I'm not surprised that this is the feeling that I get when I unbox a $360 LCT to review. Everything from the muzzle brake, the outer barrel, gas tube, receiver, the magazine release, sights, pins, and screws are all made from steel. Only the trigger, the buffer tube, and the top rail that's on the steel dust cover are made from aluminum that I could find, while the handguard, stock, and motor grip is crafted from some really dense polymer that would not bend with any amount of force that I could exert on them. This exterior build construction would cost you in weight even with an empty rifle at 8 pounds 6.5 ounces, keeping in mind that the real rifle is said to weigh in at 7.28 pounds. The 130 round mid-cap magazine would only add on an extra 4.8 ounces, but in a lot of ways, the magazine is a major downfall with this package, but more on that later. For now, we're going to run down the very end of the barrel, so we can see the window breaker topped muzzle brake that's held in place with a spring-loaded pin and a bit of glue for the US models. This would make this muzzle brake quick detach, which would be great for the AK12 suppressor that sadly doesn't exist for the airsoft world at the moment. May I suggest that LCT produces one with an integrated tracer unit like the other suppressors they produce with Ace Tech. That might be a good idea. Under the muzzle brake and at the end of the steel outer barrel, 14mm counterclockwise threads come standard like you'd expect. However, it might take a little bit of work to get to them. Focusing our attention here, the steel gas tube plug would be held on by another tightly fitted spring-loaded pin. This is removable, but unless you plan to tear down the LCK12 or 15 down completely, there's no need to take it out. From the bayonet attachment points, the thin but strong steel outer barrel and gas tube, and everything else up here, the front assembly is built incredibly. Up top, the included steel sights can be found. The front sight would be adjustable for elevation, while the rear sight is adjustable for both elevation and windage. It would also be the only sight that can be removed from this AK12 after taking out an Allen screw and sliding it away from the rail. The rear sight is much like an RPK sight with the 2 dials to make adjustments, but the aperture is quite loose. It jiggles a bit in every direction, and if you don't like the size of the aperture, well, you'll be better off using an aftermarket sight. Using any mesh mask or full face mask will also make these sights a bit useless. This is airsoft after all, so we'll trace our BBs anyway. So take what I say about these sights any way you'd like. I do like the painted characters though. As for the Polymer Furniture, the handguard bears Picatinny rails at 12 and 6 o'clock with 2 smaller but removable rails at 3 and 9 o'clock. This handguard contours to a proper grip nicely, just like the motor grip that's angled less than more standard AK variants that we're accustomed to. And it can be pulled apart after unscrewing the barrel assembly from the hop-up unit and removing 2 Allen screws. The manual makes it all pretty clear, so you'll only need some basic tools to do it. The buttons that would open up the grip, allowing a tool set to fall out, may be molded in, but if you allow this replica to break character for a moment, any left-handed or right-handed user should be comfortable with this grip. Lastly, the adjustable stock rounds off all the polymer parts. I'm just going to come out with it. I like this stock. It's easy to adjust with only a bit of wobble. The rubber shoulder rest is really dense but not uncomfortably hard. This pad can be slid off after pulling a latch forward, but you won't find a tool set inside it like the real AK12 features. And unlike the electronic blowback model, if you fold the stock and buffer tube, you won't have to see wires coming out from the back of the receiver. Just be sure to pull the stock back one position before folding it, or else you'll damage the stock right here. Unfolding the stock can be done while holding this latch downward. Don't try to pull the stock without using this latch, and don't expect the stock to latch into any slot when folding it against the receiver. It only folds over. It doesn't lock into anything else besides the latch in the back, which explains this wobble. Can you use other stocks with this buffer tube though? Yes and no. Every M4 stock is slightly different, so if you want to experiment with a few stocks that you own, then go right ahead. I just can't guarantee that they'll all fit. Finally, the steel QD sling slots given with this stock will have to work with the steel swiveling loop behind the bayonet mounts. Now the receiver and its controls are last up when covering this rifle, but there's still a bit to talk about. For one, the fire selector is of course made from steel, and it's a pain to use when this rifle is fresh out of the box. You'd think that this shelf would make things easier, like it should. After all, you don't want to take your hands away from the trigger controls for far too long when nearing a firefight. But it doesn't. It's actually a lot worse than any other selector on any AK I've ever handled. And that's true for replicas and for real AKs. LCT is known for tight tolerances, but this and the dust cover latch is taking this a bit too far. These tight parts will soften up as they're used with time, or even after taking them all apart several times like I've done. That's the way I fixed this fire selector, after reassembly. This fire selector is also incorrect for the AK12, as it doesn't feature the 2-round burst function. It's either safe, full auto, and semi. That would be correct for more standard AKs, but for the AK12, it just doesn't cut it. The 2-round burst should be in between semi and full auto, but sadly, it's not even stamped into the receiver. But the Russian characters are correct for the fire selections that are available. Besides these characters and the numbers along the buffer tube and along the rear sight, The only other markings you'll find will be the LCT model information and serial number in front of the mag well. Lifting the steel latch and pulling it through the rifle, the dust cover will unhook from the receiver so you can put it off to the side, similar to the AN94's design. Of course, this LCT comes stock with small Type 2 connections, but due to the design of the rifle, battery storage is minimal. Even with using the smallest 11.1 candy bar LiPo batteries at my disposal, I still couldn't close the rifle back up without a lot of force. If you have stick-type batteries lying around, this is the rifle to use them with. Interestingly, the push-forward mock recoil spring button and its rod make a return on this rifle, even though you can't use the button at all. I assume this was done just to cut around some corners and save some money. Now, replacing the dust cover on my rifle was definitely a chore, but with the help of something to hammer the dust cover pin back through the rifle, you should be fine. Now with it back on, you might notice that nothing wobbles, bends, creaks, or otherwise on this mostly steel rifle from LCT. Shaking this rifle around, I can only hear the steel magazine spacer inside the magwell bounce around a bit. Besides this, the only other thing that moves around that shouldn't is the bolt, but how exactly would you fix this? Grabbing the bolt and pulling it back will of course uncover the hop-up adjustment slider that slides smoothly. It's not too tight or too loose, but if it was, I could easily tighten it back up with the Phillips head screw that keeps the slider in place. Letting the bolt go and directing my attention to the steel magazine release, you can see that it's a good old AK paddle with zero altercations. Even the steel trigger guard and curved aluminum trigger look standard for any AK on the airsoft market. You won't see the iconic spring-loaded magazine kicking device that could be found on the 2011 prototype of the AK12. But then again, this is more reminiscent of the final model of the AK12 that was settled on in 2016. So releasing the magazine is done just the same way as it's always been done. But before putting on any wear on this magazine around the lips, it would jam into the magwell almost every single time. This does make for a really tight fit now, so I'd recommend sitting down for about 10 minutes with the new LCT AK12 in its magazine and just do reloads over and over again until the magazine rocks in without stutter. Taking the magazine out and just looking at the thing is an adventure on its own. Almost everything that makes this magazine shape serves a purpose. This angle near the top, that's where you put your index finger during a reload. This flat surface on the base plate, that's used when firing from a prone position. And these numbers would indicate how many rounds you have in the real magazine, made easier with the clear plastic witness holes that LCT didn't even bother with when creating this 130 round mid-cap. There are a few reasons why this rifle's competitor, the Arcturus AK12, shines brighter than the LCT. Magazine construction would be one of those reasons. Now, I'm not too sure how a real AK12 or AK15's magazine feels, but whereas the rifle is built on par with a real firearm, this magazine feels cheaper than most budget magazines I've felt. And these will cost you $20 each. That's $100 for just 5 more magazines. And it doesn't end there, because I had a lot of reliability issues with this magazine as well. This isn't a rare problem. LCT have been back and forth with their magazine quality, so here's an example of the negatives. Maybe it's due to this follower being flat and squared. Who thought that was a good idea? Thankfully, every single 8K compatible magazine that I have rocked into this LCT without any magazine lips getting jammed into the body. And this was true even for my ICS Galil magazines and my SEMA drum magazines. Even though it looks horrendous, don't do this. And this jiggly magazine spacer in the magwell might be the culprit of this. Putting all these magazines away and grabbing some tools, I began taking down the LCT AK12. The manual really helped me out here, since a few things are different from more standard AKs, but it's nothing too drastic. There's even a full breakdown video on YouTube by USAirsoft Workshop that I'll have linked in the description if you need some extra assistance. So looking at the gearbox, it's a standard version 3 comprised of an aluminum shell. Right away, we noticed a low magnetic pull from the motor. From what I've seen, most techs and longtime LCT consumers don't like these motors and quickly replace them. The motor connections, however, were so tight that it took a set of pliers to remove them, which is nice to see with the stock gun. Trying to open the gearbox shell, we noticed that the bevel gear was stuck inside its ball bearing, but this might be only true for our rifle. It was so tightly stuck that we needed to punch it out using an Allen wrench head. This ended up taking the trigger and its sled partially out, but with a bit of work, we got it all back in. Looking inside, the internals are smeared throughout with a good amount of clear grease. Pulling the mainspring out, we can see a ball bearing steel spring guide with another ball bearing inside the ported piston head, which should do away with some resistance and friction that is put onto the mainspring as it twists during firing. The nonlinear spring is an M120 with 2 tabs on the steel spring guide. However, note that there is no window for quick spring changes. You'll need to pull the gearbox down to this point to make any spring changes with this LCT. The stainless steel cylinder came with no ports, but does bear a double O-ring cylinder head with the standard rubber pad and no Zorbofane. Then we saw a single O-ring inside the plastic air nozzle for a stellar air seal. Checking for wear after the estimated 2,000 rounds put through for this review, I found none to speak of. Angle of engagement is not optimal though, requiring shaving down of the second tooth on the piston to make for a better lineup. 9mm ball bearings with shims accompanying the steel gear set then wrap up the internal look. The plastic hop-up assembly does come with a 1-point flat hop bucking. This makes for a larger contact surface that will hopefully dish out great range like most LCTs I've handled have shown me. And with that in mind, we head out to Mission Airsoft and turn on my Ace-Tech AC6000 chronograph, which I'll test out first with 0.2 gram BBs, which gave us 428 to 444 feet per second readings. Most LCT rifles are said to shoot hot, and this rifle doesn't go against that. 366 to 374 feet per second with 0.28 gram BBs were the results of my second test, and then with 0.32 gram BBs, I saw 342 to 347 feet per second. Switching to full auto with an 11.1 volt 900 mAh 25C battery, the proper reading was 18.6 rounds per second. The magazine couldn't keep up with this rate of fire, of course, explaining why I couldn't get a second 18.6 RPS to pop up on my chronograph. But regardless, 18.6 RPS isn't bad, but nothing out of the ordinary. I then loaded the magazine up again and attached a bipod, so as to get the most accurate readings at 12 feet or 4 yards as possible. I started off pretty low on target, but at this range, shots were really tight. At 50 feet with the same 0.28 gram BBs, hits on a chest-sized target won't be a problem as long as both of your eyes are working. At 100 feet, I had a volunteer who helped me show that this distance isn't at all a challenge for the LCT AK12. You'll have to challenge targets at 150 feet or 50 yards with a slight cross breeze to begin to have trouble getting every shot to land true. But even then, you could always switch up to 0.32 gram BBs. For standard airsoft engagements, this rifle will get you those hits. I can't really say that I'm surprised. I'd expect nothing less of an LCT with a full-length barrel. After packing up my bags and traveling to my friend Jaime's studio, he showed me that this AK-12 can belt out the standard decibel readings for an AEG. These would be about the same readings that we saw with the G&G Mark I SBR. And for those who are interested, these readings were recorded with an SM7B microphone with a Scarlett 18i20 interface running to a Golden Age Pre-70-3 and a Pro VLA compressor. This would conclude my findings for this rifle, only leaving my final thoughts to be mentioned. From its rivets to its furniture, the LCT AK12 stands out without sacrificing exterior quality. The magazines could use an overhaul, and the amount of over-tightened controls that rival even the real rifle could be toned down. Of course, the motor could also use an upgrade as well. No one doubts the kind of torture that an LCT body can be put through, but a MOSFET, a quick change spring, and a lighter spring from the factory could have made this rifle overachieve. Several AK-12s are now available in the airsoft market. People can decide just how to spend their money when manufacturers are the topic of discussion. So you can spend $360 for this LCT, or another $60 for an electronic blowback system, or spend $345 for the Arcturus model that has several advantages that you might desire. The anti-reversal trip switch and the trigger guard, the quick access spring, the higher quality magazines with variable capacities, a mock but still non-functioning 2-round burst selection stamped into the receiver. You can even go as far and beyond and spend $700 on an MPO or pray for GHK to use the body of this model to produce the first gas blowback AK12. You have a decision to make if the AK12 must be in your collection or in your hands on the field. I just hope that I made it easier for you to decide which one to select. I hope you enjoyed this review over the LCT LCK12. This review was a long time coming, but I really wanted to have fun with it. These reviews take a lot of time to assemble, but I'd like to thank Brandon Herrera for being a part of it. This man puts together some of the best videos in the firearms community, and I really respect him for not making fun of the idea of making a guest appearance in an airsoft video. Please head over to his channel with the link left in the description and subscribe, or show him some love if you see him in the comments of this video. If you think you're in love with the AK, just know he'll always have you beat. After all, he only builds the damn things. I'd also like to thank Airsoft GI, who made this review possible by sending me the LCT AK12 in the first place. You'll find links to this rifle and the EBB model in the description as well. Big shoutouts go to the channel members as well that helped me put together these videos. These guys help me with video ideas, titles, and Tier 2 members even get the chance to watch videos hours or even days before they're released to anybody else. Definitely check out the advantages of becoming a USAirsoft channel member if you'd like to support this channel directly. And finally, a special thanks to these past Super Chat donators from the last live stream. I appreciate every one of you. But until that next video drops from the city of San Antonio, this has been Scott Hollenbeck, and I'll be sure to see you all next time. Seems like every magazine that I have feeds better than the actual magazine it comes with. GMP Plum magazines. Those feed. It's too tight for me to do a magazine-to-magazine flip. SEMA RPK style magazines. Those feed perfectly. And the last big one, here's an old SEMA drum mag with some dying batteries. There we go. Very nice. So if you don't want to get the big LCT ones, you can get SEMA drum mags. Now before anyone says anything, this is all just rainwater. This is just a big flooded area. That never gets old. All right, the rain's coming down, so this is the last one. All right, that's our cue to get out of here.